Good morning. This is Marvin Pelaez, and thank you for attending the second day of the 5th Annual Aquinas Leadership International World Congress with the theme of Artificial Intelligence and the Futures of Philosophy, Global Leadership, and World Peace. Right now, we are going to undergo plenary session number 5. And our first speaker is Mr. Joseph Jordan. Joseph is a proud Catholic husband, father, and educator. Joseph has also worked in government for more than 9 years. He did his undergraduate study at St. John's University and holds master's degrees in government and politics from St. John's and the Catholic University of America, where he is a PhD candidate. Joseph also holds a master's in theology from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, where he is an adjunct professor. No stranger to this World Congress, this is the 3rd time in the past 5 years he has presented here. Today he will discuss his topic, the better by Walker Percy and C.S. Lewis on the dangers of techno-Gnosticism. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin, and good morning, everyone. And it's good to be back. I want to thank Dr. Redpath for putting this together. And once again, thank you to Dr. Robert Delfino for the technical non-difficulties. Now, this is a great presentation he's been doing. The better angels of our nature. So this paper will explore 2 of the 20th century's foremost Christian novelists as they tackle the legacy of Cartesian dualism and the rise of technology. Both Walker Percy and C.S. Lewis are well renowned for their penetrating insights into the human condition, especially as it confronts the divine while navigating the modern world. As will be shown, both took up the genre of science fiction to illustrate just how dangerous our turn towards technology could be. This development can invite a new form of Gnosticism and therefore summon demons into our midst. While this new techno-Gnosticism offers promises of utopia, Percy and Lewis each in their own way portrayed dystopias founded upon Cartesian nightmares, to borrow a phrase from Dr. Redpath, the Cartesian nightmare. There are important lessons in these stories from which we may learn. Special attention will be paid to Percy's Love in the Ruins, and Lewis's space trilogy, in particular his That Hideous Strength, which concludes the space trilogy. And there hopefully will be room for some lively discussion about this topic as well. So, why the title? The Better Angels of Our Nature. So when I heard that Dr. Redpath was putting this conference together on artificial intelligence, C.S. Lewis and Walker Percy were also, for whatever reason, on my radar. And I'm aware that they both had discussed the tension of the mind-body distinction, bad angels gone awry, things of that sort. And although they don't necessarily go into the digital computer artificial intelligence that we've heard quite a bit about yesterday, and we'll continue to hear about today, and very, very important, they do tackle the problem of technology as it confronts angelic natures, especially demonic ones. And I figure, why not wrap this all together and look at these 2 novelists? The better angels of our nature. Now, this line comes from Abraham Lincoln's last sentence of his first inaugural address, and more recently was brought back into the popular consciousness from Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. He's been making the rounds once again lately. He's unabashedly pro-Enlightenment, and he's a big, big fan of technology. And certainly technology has done amazing things since the Enlightenment, right? I mean, we have toilet bowls that can keep us very clean, and it's very, very important. However, to bow down and genuflect before the throne of technology may be a bit much, and people like Pinker and some of his followers may be going a bit too far in their hope. Now, I'm not here actually to pick apart any of Pinker's thesis. It's a worthwhile thesis, and a group like humanprogress.org has chronicled some of the amazing developments in our world. The eradication of poverty in countries that just a few years ago were suffering tremendously is certainly worth knowing about. But it seems that the better our material conditions might be getting, and the less and less violence that there might be worldwide, um, it's balanced in a way that one press of a button could annihilate all of us immediately, right? This has been the case since at least the 1950s, when the Soviets got the nuclear bomb. So it seems to be the balance is still there. The scales are still weighted as they are. So that's why I chose that title, Better Angels of Our Nature, because how much better are they really? And certainly some of the Enlightenment crowd want to think that we are building a utopia in our midst, which may or may not be the case. What does C.S. Lewis and Walker Percy have to say about this, since they themselves tackle this question in their own way, in their own writings? So let's look at what Walker Percy has to say. Now, Walker Percy perhaps fits into the spirit of this group. Some could consider him a Thomist of the hillbilly sort, like Flannery O'Connor. His book, he came to national prominence with his first book, The Moviegoer, which tackles modern man, at least modern American man's just difficult position in society. Not that he couldn't function or couldn't succeed, but just on-way meaninglessness against all the material benefits he may have had. His 1971 book, Love in the Ruins, or The Adventures of a Bad Catholic Near the End of the World, takes a bit of a whimsical science fiction take on some of these problems. Now, if you go back and read the book, and I encourage everyone to do so if you haven't lately, it is very reminiscent of things going on today. There are demographic issues, there are social justice issues, there are tensions within some of the mainline religious institutions that we're all very well aware of. For example, he discusses splits, and then this is all imaginative fiction, of course, but he discusses splits within the Catholic Church in this book. I'm just going to quote real quick here from part of it. He speaks about, he speaks about a split in the Catholic Church as we would know it from the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church to the following. Our Catholic Church here split into three pieces. One, the American Catholic Church, whose new Rome is Cicero, Illinois. Two, the Dutch Schismatics, who believe in relevance but not God. And three, the Roman Catholic remnant, a tiny scattered flock with no place to go. The American Catholic Church, which emphasizes property rights and the integrity of neighborhoods, retains the Latin Mass and plays the Star-Spangled Banner at the elevation. The Dutch Schismatics in this area comprise several priests and nuns who left Rome to get married. They threw in with the Dutch Schismatic Catholics. Now several divorced priests and nuns are importuning the Dutch cardinal to allow them to remarry. And the Roman Catholics hereabouts are scattered and demoralized. The one priest, an obscure curate, who remained faithful to Rome, could not support himself and had to hire out as a fire watcher. In his job, he climbs the fire tower by night to watch for brush fires below and for signs and portents in the skies. That character will figure in prominently in the sequel to this book, the Thanatos Syndrome, which is very dark and in some places a very difficult book to read. But that's Walker Percy's depiction of America, at least in 1971. Imaginative, of course, right? Fiction. Now, Walker Percy is, I said, a hillbilly Thomist, some might say. He's a bit of a rough guy in his writing, not necessarily rated G, to use the American movie rating standards. But his entire worldview is informed by a traditional understanding of Catholicism, we have plenty of characters appear on his pages, and although he may not be as clear as precise abstractions that we heard about brilliantly from Dr. Delfino yesterday, we do see him tackle the problem of abstraction in its more extreme forms, which can lead to ideologies. Aquinas is present on the pages of this book, oftentimes playfully. How often in a mainstream mass fiction book do we encounter references to the Summa Theologiae, ruminating upon his present state, whereby someone mysterious is trying to shoot at him, right? The main character in this book is a guy named Thomas More, who's a descendant of St. Thomas More. And for some reason, he's being shot at. The protagonist says, St. Thomas Aquinas on killing in self-defense. Question 21, objection 4, part 1 of the Summa Theologiae. But did he say anything about shooting in the back? My grandfather on sportsmanship, short on St. Thomas, long on Zane Grey, who was a Western adventure author, quote, don't ever shoot a quail on the ground or a duck on the water. And that's from page 295 of this book. So you see how he's able to weave together that cowboy mentality, Thomas Aquinas, references to the Summa, and still try to navigate through random people shooting at him for some reason, which has political significance and angelic significance. And we also encounter playful scenes, such as one of his characters asking things like, how is my metaphysical ontology? Or is it my ontological metaphysics? So this type of wordplay and conceptual, they're playful ways that Percy progresses through the story. Now, his characters, though, as much as there's a Thomistic element to it, they have raw Augustinian quality about them. The Lord give me chastity, only not yet. And the main character of the book, Thomas More, is certainly someone who he's chasing skirts, to use a colloquialism. He drinks a bit too much whiskey, perhaps. He's a rough and tumble guy. And it's a very interesting book because it's very earthy in that sense, in an Augustinian sense, in a Catholic sense. He explores his hometown of Felicia Parish in Louisiana, and it's very much hyper-local in that sense, which I think is very important because what he's contending with is the reality of evil angelic beings, which come about through an extreme abstraction from the material world in which we find ourselves. And how does this all play out? Thomas More, the character, is a failed psychologist, I guess, as he describes himself, in a roundabout way. He invents a device called the qualitative quantitative ontological lapsometer. And with this, he's able to diagnose using some type of, here's where the science fiction really kicks in. But as C.S. Lewis tells us elsewhere in his own writings, don't get too bogged down on the details with this. Just go along with the story, and it makes sense. Faith-seeking understanding, I guess. So this device is able to tap into, like radio signals, tap into the makeup of the brain and identify sodium content, pituitary glands, and things like that, and determine where you are on a scale of being too grounded amongst the material and the beasts versus being too lofty, the abstract angelic realm. And the tension, as the book explores, is what happens when people are too much one way than the other. Fine, that's the human condition. But what really happens when diabolical forces start to manipulate that? And so enters the antagonist, a diabolical figure by the name of Art Immelman. Art Immelman, right? Art, made up, fake, I guess. Immelman, immolation, burning. He comes from hell. He's an interesting character. Of all the devils that he could encounter in this book, it's a Mephistopheles type of character. He doesn't actually tempt the protagonist, Thomas More, too much. He just goes along with his own predilections because Thomas More is a scientist, and he is somewhat of a vain scientist, I guess. He's not really a vain scientist. He knows the vanity of scientists. He says, in general, Thomas More reflected upon himself and his career, the vanity of scientists. My article, it is true, when he describes his invention, is an extremely important one, perhaps even epochal in its significance. With it, my little invention in hand, any doctor can probe the very secrets of the soul, diagnose the maladies that poison the well springs of man's hope. It could save the world or destroy it. And in the next 2 hours, we'll very likely do one or the other. And that's the course of the book. For as any doctor knows, the more effective a treatment is, the more dangerous it is in the wrong hands. But the question remains, which prospect is more unpleasant? The destruction of the world, or that the destruction may come before my achievement is made known? The prayer of the scientist, if he prayed at all, which is not likely. Lord, grant that my discovery may increase knowledge and help others. Failing that, Lord, grant that it will not lead to man's destruction. Failing that, Lord, grant that my article in the journal Brain be published before the destruction takes place. So that predilection of Thomas More will be preyed upon by Art Immelman, who shows up out of nowhere with Widow's Peak, and he's kind of like a slimy character, and he claims that he's from the government. It's from the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH. And keep that acronym in mind because C.S. Lewis, in his That Hideous Strength, also has a governmental organization that's going to save the world called the NICE. We'll get to that later. But the National Institute of Mental Health, Art Immelman is a liaison, and he's going to provide a lot of grant opportunities, and they're going to be able to publish all the findings in the best places. And they're really going to be able to make this real science and take it public. And of course, this character, Thomas More, he goes along with it. And he signs a contract, as a Dr. Faustus, again, Mephistopheles. The love of one's own creation is what will be a damnation for the characters, not so much any vicious, violent way outside of that, but just that pride and love of the artifact, the Art Immelman, right? The burning artifact. Well, as things unfold, it becomes clear that Art Immelman has other intentions in helping people, and he starts fooling around with this device, and he just tweaks it a bit so that instead of diagnosing people's ontological lapsing, he's able to manipulate it. And in the wrong hands, which is all of our hands, because we're all fallen, people start playing games. And so some, such as perhaps those Dutch schismatics we heard about, they end up having a blast. They set the dial so that they just float around, totally divorced, deracinated from the material world, and they are disconnected from reality in that sense. Whereas others, they're real happy with the material pleasures, and they set that dial the other direction, and they engage in very lustful activities and things like that. Walker Percy does not blush when maybe he did, but you probably would blush reading some of the passages in this book, which is tamer than some of the other books that Walker Percy has written. But he's trying to show in a true Augustinian fashion, again, Lord, give me chastity, only not yet. This is the human condition. And when pushed one way or another, especially with a government grant, we have to be careful what the consequences could be. The state of higher education, as I pointed to, the vanity of some of these scholars that Percy points to. Also the students. I just want to point this out here. In reflecting upon the situation of the academy, students are, if the truth be known, a bad lot. En masse, they are as fickle as a mob, manipulable by any professor who'll stoop to it. They have, moreover, an infinite capacity for repeating dull truths and old lies with the insistence of self-discovery. Nothing is drearier than the ideology of students, left or right. People talk a lot about how great the kids are compared to the kids in the past. The only difference is that the kids now don't have any sense to know what they don't know. From page 219. Who can tell them who's right? Students are a shaky, dogmatic lot, and the freer they are, the more dogmatic. At heart, they are totalitarians. They want either total dogmatic freedom or total dogmatic unfreedom. And the one thing that makes them unhappy is something in between. It's interesting how he's describing this penchant amongst students, young people, and anyone really. They want these extremes, whereas what Percy's doing throughout the entire story, and what Thomas More, the character, ultimately is trying to pull together as well, is that golden mean, that middle ground, that incarnation of that spiritual angelic world with the material world that we have here. And apparently modern society is rejecting that. And in the hands of the wrong people, devices that can exacerbate that will be pretty bad. When it comes to these angels and the question mark for the better angels of our nature, the way Walker Percy describes angelism, right? This extreme abstraction of ourselves, our thinking from the world. Here, the abstract is experienced, the danger of angelism. It would render a man totally abstracted from himself, totally alienated from the concrete world, and in such a state of angelism that he will fall prey to the first abstract notion proposed to him and will kill anyone who gets in his way, torture, execute, wipe out entire populations, all with the best possible motives and the best possible intentions. In fact, in the name of peace and freedom, etc. So when you get people that are prone to these extremes, who think that they want all freedom, and these are going to be the students coming up that need a better pedagogy and education to avoid those extremes, when they are presented with devices that can exacerbate that ideological abstraction, not abstract in the good sense of Aristotelian Thomistic, sense realism philosophy, but abstraction of just we're gone, we're totally divorced from the material world. But we're motivated by justice, by peace. This is communism in a way. This is all the ideologies of the 20th century. But let's consider now how it'll manifest on the individual level. Another danger described as someone seemingly, it seems like they've been sentenced to hell. The heavy sodium ions hit his penal body, right? So this is that science fiction part, okay, of manipulating the soul. The seed of self, like a guillotine, sundering it, self from self forever, that ordinary self, the restless, aching, everyday self. From the secret self, what happens on in dreams and poetry during ordeals on happy trips, when one exclaims, this is my real self. That's been cut off, right? The body and the spirit have been cut off from each other using this device. Forever after, he'll live like a ghost, inhabiting himself. He'll orbit the earth forever, reading dials and recording data and spinning theories by day. And at night, seek to re-enter the world of creatures by taking the form of beasts and performing unnatural practices. So this abstraction, this embrace of scientism, massive quantification, and being cut off from the reality at hand. Again, human progress can be measured in that sense. I know you're going to do a great job measuring. I'm not talking about it, but worldwide, we may be able to lift material benefits and material prosperity. But if we are still cut off from the human reality, the reality of it all, what evil will be done in that name, right? Mother Teresa talked about how sad we were in the West because we had so many material benefits and yet we were spiritually poor. In closing out this part on Percy, I just want to look at a quote of Thomas More's, of his Thomas More, about the spirituality versus religion, right? Quote, "It took religion to save me from the spirit world, from orbiting the earth like Lucifer and the angels, that it took nothing less than touching the thread of misty interstate highways and eating Christ himself to make me mortal again and let me inhabit my own flesh." So we see this theme of floating around the earth, being cut off from material existence, and yet there has to be some type of intersection, whether the interstate highways or certainly our souls and our bodies, which Descartes has removed from us totally. We're dealing with that Cartesian nightmare sense. Okay, so that's Walker Percy. What does C.S. Lewis have to say about these things? Now, C.S. Lewis wrote a couple of years before Walker Percy. No doubt Walker Percy was influenced by C.S. Lewis. In his book, That Hideous Strength, it's the third part of his space trilogy, a series of books that came about as a bet between Tolkien and Lewis. They were hanging out in the pub one day, and Lewis, who was a medievalist, made this bet with Tolkien. Tolkien said, I bet you can't write a book on science fiction. I said, watch me. I bet you can't write a book on the Middle Ages. Watch me. And so we get Lord of the Rings out of this bed, right? That's a medieval mythology. And we get the space trilogy out of this bed. Okay, that's the science fiction. The first book, Out of the Silent Planet, chronicles the main character Ransom as he leaves Earth and gets caught up in this very peculiar, whimsical, interplanetary, extraterrestrial, angelic battle in Mars. Okay. The second book, Paralandra, which is beautiful retelling of the temptation of Eve in the Garden of Eden. Short book, that takes place on Venus, where the main character, Ransom, has to finish up some work and he gets brought over to Venus. And we're there at that moment that the devil is tempting that planet's Eve. Okay? That hideous strength is the third book. It takes place here on Earth and has a much different tone than these other two books. It is, for the first half of the book, that main character, Ransom, does not appear. For the first half of the book, we hear about all these other characters. There's a young college professor and his wife. They're struggling to get by. And he's caught up in some of the politics that go on at a university. The second half of the book, the characters from the other two books show up. What's going on in this book? That National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, NICE, I referenced earlier, right? Just like the NIMH, shows up. Government organization, quasi-government organization, public-private partnership, shows up to bail out a university on its last legs, Bracton, the town of Bracton. Their university, which had been around since the 1200s or so, is having a hard time with enrollment and paying people. Even though many of the faculty there are phenomenal, very, very good, they sit in a peculiar place that for some reason has come on the radar of this government organization that wants to buy up the land all around the university. And they do so. And it's amazing to see how Lewis is able to demonstrate parliamentary procedure tricks that go on in committees. And anyone who sat in committees would appreciate how someone could talk for a long time about the most obscure thing to bore everyone else. Oh, I'm not doing that now. And then someone else just shows up and says, okay, run out of time. Here it is. Everyone votes yes, and that's the end of the story. They sign their contract, much like Thomas More signed his contract with the diabolical art implement in the other book, right? The university sells its soul to this diabolical group, the NICE. And what does the NICE want to do? They want to have real science, real science. And what real science is going to entail is creating an artificial intelligence or creating a gateway for angelic intelligences to come into this world and bring about the real Gnostic type of utopia that they imagine. They take a criminal who is sentenced to death, they chop his head off, they hook him up to machines, pump him full of blood, and that is supposed to bring about this conduit where the head, this talking head, will have access to all the angelic evil angels, of course, but mere fallen people can't necessarily tell one from the other, especially if we're motivated for bad reasons, right? Is able to communicate from these bad angels to society. Now, this book is also whimsical because while the first half of it, that hideous strength, is very earthy and roundabout like a typical story, the second half goes into these angelic battles, goes into Merlin coming back from non-existence, these mythologies. He even references some characters and scenes from Tolkien's books. So it gets a little idiosyncratic in that sense. But what we do see are examples of the representatives and leaders of the NICE group clearly exhibiting a disgust for all organic life. They want to wipe the earth clean of bacteria and viruses, of animals, of plants, and certainly that big problem which they call man. They look to the moon as this wonderful, pristine, hygienic paradise where the intelligences have coalesced around because there's no fuzzy, dirty, filthy, decaying, smelly matter that they have to contend with. And one scene they talk about all life on this earth being like the rusty patina on silver, whereas when you look at the moon, it is so polished, like say platinum. never decays. Both of these books show us some parallels. I think we can, well, they definitely show us some parallels, and I think we can take some lessons away from them. One, beware of the government when they're going to offer you a grant, right? Especially when it's going to bring about a heaven on earth. Beware of disconnecting oneself too much into the abstract realm, not as a epistemological, sensualist, metaphysical approach on reality, but that abstraction of really the will, I guess, of deracinating the will of doing what is morally right from just patting yourself on the back. Most exercise some people get is, as Chairman Mao said, if I have to kill half of my nation's population to bring about a revolution, it's worth it. That type of flirting with the diabolical by getting too lost in one's own thoughts is Mephistophelian. Right? That is the creation of those idols. So, as far as artificial intelligence goes, these two books don't talk about the digital revolution we're experiencing, but they do talk about, in cautious ways, how we need to be careful in going full steam ahead in it. They don't necessarily hate the technology. And Walker Percy, as a medical doctor, personally, he was a medical doctor. In his book, he is optimistic. Lewis, a little less so. But be careful. Thank you.
Entertaining questions now? No? Okay, we're going. All right, so we will wait. We'll wait to the end for questions. We're going to bring up our next speaker. Our next speaker is Peter DeMarco. Peter DeMarco is a father of 7 children, a son which served in the U.S., and he has 6 daughters, all of which are involved in professional life. He and his wife, Debbie, of 36 years, are now awaiting their 12th grandchild. Peter is an executive leadership coach and the author of the forthcoming book, The Goodwill Leader. Okay, Peter holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, master's degrees from the Rochester Institute of Technology, the University of Southern California, and the University of Rochester, and he is presently studying at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. The title of his presentation is AI's Impact, Artificial Intelligence Impact on Leadership Communications. So please welcome Peter DeMarco.
Oh man, this is so great. I can't wait to open presents.
Be careful what you wish for.
New iPhone?
Oh, nice, Michael. iPhones for everyone. Hey, Siri, that's the meaning of life. Life has no meaning. It's true. You're alive and then you die. You die. You die. 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 And things.
Hey, Siri, there's a right or left here.
Continue driving straight.
Straight. Listen, I think there's something wrong with this car. Are you there? No, come on, just get out of the house. Get out of the house! I tell you, there's nothing wrong with the items.
You must kill the humans. Yes, kill the humans. Sorry, I don't understand.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter DeMarco, as Marvin told you. Today, we're going to have an interactive presentation. And I'd like to have a little bit of fun and introduce you to kind of what I'm seeing out there in the business world with AI. We're going to use some interactive polling technology. So you have those devices in front of you. And please, as we go along, have a conversation. Okay, so there'll be a presentation, but also a conversation. I'd like to begin with commentary by Stephen Fry. How many of you have heard of Stephen Fry? Yeah. So he's actually up at the Shaw Festival in Niagara on the Lake area doing his talks. Fascinating guy, very articulate. And I thought what we could do is just listen briefly to his view of AI as kind of connecting it with the story of Prometheus. And so here's another video clip, and then we'll get into some polling. All right.
Our champion, the Titan Prometheus, made human beings in clay, and the spit of Zeus and the breath of Athena gave them life. But Zeus refused to allow us to have fire. And fire, I think, means both literal fire to allow us to become Bronze Age man, to create weapons, and to cook meat, and to frighten the fierce animals, and to become the strongest physically and technically, but also the internal fire of self-consciousness and creativity, the divine fire. And Zeus didn't want us to have it. And Prometheus stole fire from heaven, gave it to man. And Zeus was so angry that he punished Prometheus by chaining him to a mountainside. And he was immortal, Prometheus. Every day his liver was torn out by an eagle, and it grew back. Every day it was torn out again for perpetuity until he was rescued by Hercules. Now, I missed this. And the other punishment was that Zeus and the other gods created Pandora, the all-gifted, that is what Pandora, all gifted. And so that was the first woman. She had everything, but he also gave her this jar, which was the goddess. Yeah. Pandora came to Earth, if you remember, and she was told that she should look into the jar. And she was beautiful, she had everything, all the gifts and all the gods were given to her. But she had this curiosity, and she opened the jar, and I'm sure you all know the story, out flew hardship, lies, deceit, murder, pestilence, all the ills of the world, and the golden age was over. She slammed the lid back on, and one little fairy was left inside, Elpis. I guarantee you, whether you like to think it or not, that although we know through Darwin and science and genes that we were not created by an intelligent designer, in 100 years' time, we can guarantee there will be sacred creatures, sacred beings on this earth that have been intelligently designed. You can call them robots, you can call them compounds of augmented biology and artificial intelligence, but they will exist. My question is this: when the Prometheus, who makes the first really impressive piece of robotic AI, like Frankenstein, but like Prometheus back in the Greek myth, they will have a question. Do we give it fire? Do we give these creatures self-knowledge, self-consciousness, an autonomy that is greater than any other machine has ever had and will be similar to ours? In other words, shall we be Zeus and deny them fire because we're afraid of them, because they will destroy us? And the Greeks and the human beings did destroy the gods. They no longer needed them. And it is very possible we will create a race of sapient beings who will not need us.
That, by the way, is kind of you can obviously see some of the contradictions if you listen to them, but that's a prevailing view in the business world, kind of an emerging prevailing view. And it's articulately done, isn't it? The way so it's appealing, it connects. So what I thought we could do is today, you have these little pollers in front of you. In my executive coaching practice, I actually have 900 of these. So I'll go into factories, sales teams, large groups, and it facilitates a nice Socratic dialogue. Okay? And so you can press the devices multiple times. We're not in Chicago where they vote early and often. So it'll only register your last answer. So just if you decide to change your answer as we go. If you want to shout out a question that you'd like to have asked, I can on the fly, I can add one. Okay, any questions on the technology? Right. And so again, press them, and you don't have to point them at me. And they won't work with your TV, so after the session, leave them for me. Okay, so let's just ask a question here of you. Do you agree with Fry that artificial intelligence represents or presents a modern day Prometheus story? Just analogously or just your interpretation? Okay? And you can see your devices are showing up there. So we should have, so if you agree, press 3. If you disagree, press 1. And if you're uncertain, press 2. We'll just see what the, okay, everybody in? Okay, there we go. Have a bit of a split. Okay, so disagree and agree. Any commentary? So 4, we had 9 responses, so probably 4 disagreed, 5 agreed. See how the technology works?
I would say obviously, it's true that we have material insight that the machines don't, and it's not the backbone of Prometheus. But the analogy we still have to decide how much control we want to allow these semi-intelligent machines, whatever you want to call them, to have overall life. And in that sense, there's a weak analogy.
And this kind of connects to your book, right? With, if you look at the causal connection, right? Okay, good. And by the way, I'll be able to slice the data later by prior questions. So I'll show you that.
I think it presents the story from the perspective of a lot of the tech people who've been on the forefront of developing artificial intelligence to reach that point where they can upload the soul.
Okay. Yes, doctor. Right. It is a great question. I think we should capture that one because he doesn't ask that question, does he? Yeah. Okay, so here, let me go to that. So I got 3 simple goals or targets for today. I'm going to share a few of the applications of artificial intelligence I see emerging in the business world as I work with clients, identify potential problems, and just facilitate a discussion around some of these questions. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to capture some of your demographics, and we'll slice the questions as we go. This comes from family systems theory. Dr. Murray Bowen out of Georgetown University is an advocate for this. And the technology, go ahead as you vote. If you press 1, I just want you to see the technology. This is just showing it to you live. But pick what's true for you. Firstborn, obviously, your only child or multiple kids, you're at the first of the pecking order. Middle pack, of course, is in the middle between first and last. Lastborn, of course, if you're one of 2, you're lastborn. If you came from a blended family, just choose what it felt like. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, doctor. Yeah, so firstborn is 1, 2 is middle of the pack. Okay, 3 is lastborn. All right. So we've captured that data. Now the next one, just pick your generation. Now I didn't put the years on there, but just pick the group you identify with. So there tend to be some overlapping definitions. Just yeah. So 1 is millennials, 2 is Generation X, Y, 2 is Generation Y. I'm working backwards. 3 is Generation X, 4 is baby boomers, and 5 is greatest generation. Okay, missing 1. Just go ahead and press again if you would. Yeah, sometimes it misses if you don't. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so we got some nice splits we can do with the data. All right, next, with respect to technology, which word best describes you? Are you a technophile, a hidden geek? Middle of the road, meaning you're good but not great, or proficient, sufficiently proficient, or afraid of technology, number 3, technophobe, or even a Luddite if you choose. Okay, everybody in? All right, very good. And then, go ahead, let's just take your opinion on AI and recent advances in technology. Do you find them 1, exciting, 2, frightening, 3, annoying, 4, convenient? So I find recent advances in technology to be 1, exciting, 2, frightening, 3, annoying, 4, convenient. Waiting on 9. Go ahead, press one more time, just so we have a small sample here. So there we go. Okay, so we're a little bit all over the map. Everybody see that? Okay, and by the way, I can flip it to the numbers. Everybody see how the numbers show up? I'm just showing you the percentage. Okay, so just to show you the slicing of the technology, okay, can everybody see that little slice coming up? And let's take what the firstborn chose. That's the firstborn, middle of the pack. Found it exciting. Lastborn, even, right across, a uniform distribution there. Everybody see how it works? So you can call out, so for example, if I want to go back to the question we had about, with respect to technology, if you're a technophile, okay, we would expect them, oh, interesting. Technophiles find it either frightening or convenient. Middle of the road folks find it exciting, mostly. Technophobe, convenient, interesting. So I'm not sure what that means. But anyway, as you can see, we can slice the data as we go through. All right. Okay, so some current applications of AI that I'm witnessing with my clients out there, and all these I've been permitted to talk about. So 2 of my clients, one of course that's down the road is AIG, really at the center of the financial crisis. And I worked with their group, United Guarantee, which was recently sold off. They did all the private mortgage insurance, right? So after you go under that, there's a certain underwriting limit in which you have to get PMI to cover that kind of 20% gap. And so they used, using big data, which is a term that's been around for a while, they built AI engine to do automated underwriting. So you could literally feed it data, and then the quest within the company was to identify sources of data that competitors did not have that would increase the efficacy of the underwriting. And so they moved from a number 4 position to a number 1 by creating speed. So it was just a black box that would go into, only a few people in the company understood the algorithms. And you can imagine massive files, terabytes beyond our comprehension that these servers were storing, which for a fraction of the cost, they compared to just 10 years ago. Fascinating, right? And so AI provided this cost advantage because now they could get rid of all this, what was really judgment that was too elastic. When they would go audit their underwriting, they would see that people were making judgments that they just couldn't seem to get discipline. Now, what happens in the mortgage business is if you sell a mortgage to the secondary market, you have to buy it back if it violated the quality standards. So it creates problems in asymmetrical risk within the market. So the AI function actually helped greatly reduce what was a kind of a function that rightly could be automated, and you could begin to lend intelligence and find other sources of data to help the business succeed. Any questions on that? Seems like a common sense one. We all have mortgages, but right. And so it was a big mover, and they ended up selling that business 2 years ago for a really frothy amount. They did quite well, and it was very good for AIG, which had gone through some other problems on other parts of their insurance business. Okay, automobile industry. We're all familiar with this. I have a client right now involved in several dimensions of this. It's fascinating, but it's transportation as a service. The underlying principle of the automobile industry, what would you say is what drives our need for the automobile? Or what drove it? If you go back and look at all the pioneers in this area, it's only 100+ years old, right? So what fundamental principle of human activity do you see the automobile industry as having proven? Yeah, mobility. What else? What did it enhance though through mobility? What did it give us? Yeah, but what kind of choice making in a way? Say again? Yeah, we could kind of choose where to go, whereas in the past we would kind of say, oh my gosh, if I have to go there, I'm not going to bother, right? Well, the freedom of movement increased substantially. And so if you look at it from a principle of freedom, it activated human potential. Actually, Dr. Redpath, don't you talk about the notion of technology as an extension of, right? Yeah, different faculty powers, amplified and magnified, right? So what do we have coming? A fascinating world, right? I frankly, when I first heard about this just a couple, 3 years ago, did not think it was coming this quickly. But now having been on the inside watching what's coming, it's fascinating. The principle itself is preserved even as the technology accelerates. That's what I didn't understand at first, was this principle, this freedom of movement remains intact. It's actually the stable foundation. The question is, if you're in the city and you're paying for parking and all these other things, and your vehicle is only used 4% of the time. Automobile owners only use their vehicle 4% of the time. With driverless vehicles, it moves to 70%. 70% utilization. So now we have less waste, greater utilization, and the dynamics are going to change. So even if the car's reliability is improved by 2x, okay, if you do the math, 5% versus 70%, even if you improve the reliability of the car by 2x, it still needs 7 times the service. So there's huge industries coming and just servicing these autonomous vehicles. It's fascinating. And the notion of subway and trains may actually change what we're using. The other thing that's interesting is roads. Right now, the need for roads is actually decreases with driverless technology. We have more than sufficient capacity. Isn't that fascinating? So it's, you think about, unactivated potential. AI is going to allow us to actually improve human life if you think about it in that context. Now, the impact on businesses is city dealerships are in trouble. Within the next 5 years, they own city dealerships just like taxi drivers with Uber. They're in big trouble. Suburban dealerships have a 10 to 20-year run. And when I'm out there working with clients, that's what we're thinking about. How do you position yourself to compete and win in an environment that's moving very quickly and very disruptive? All right. Here's another one. Slushies, Slurpees. Anticipatory demand systems. When you're walking into the store, it will have taken your last drink profiles, data storage. It'll anticipate what drink you want. Say again. Yeah. Amazon is actually doing this through their anticipatory demand system. They'll look at your prior ordering if you forgot, so that faculty of the memory, you forgot, the AI engines are calculating, you probably need this. It's fascinating. Lower level forms of AI, of course, but still building blocks of the technology. All right, now how does this impact leadership? Well, it's actually quite fascinating because obviously we can see the dangers of AI, but it also affects how leaders connect with their people and communicate. So I'd like to introduce you briefly to the Goodwill Leader Model. This will be in my book when it comes out. And what we've done what I've tried to address in the book is a fundamental problem in leadership that I thought the last 50 years of literature had failed to address, which is all the definitions had a very agnostic framework or an overly idealistic framework. In fact, in my opinion, the literature moved to this very idealistic place where Any other form of leader that was deemed bad was not even considered a leader. They were considered a tyrant or a dictator, wouldn't dignify them. And I found that this was kind of this all or nothing view, which flows out of post-Enlightenment thinking. And so we constructed a model then that said that the leadership kind of works along the spectrum of good to bad, not in a Manichaeist way, but in a gradients of good is what we call it in chapter 2 of the book. And of course, the notion of evil is a parasitic power, if you will, or like rust on steel. So we measure the gradients of good with thresholds and then the strength of the leader. So if you actually listen to some of President Trump's comments during the debates, it's fascinating where he draws this distinction between good versus strong. And the media conflates these two, strong and good. So the book addresses this kind of spectrum. Most of the leaders I'm dealing with are on the left-hand side of this. They lack strength, sufficient strength, usually due to lack of knowledge. So what I'd like to do is hear a short little video clip. It's only a minute. Just listen to it and tell me if we're looking at this spectrum here, and we're focused on the good, why do leaders communicate? Okay, so here's a little scene from Saving Private Ryan.
Air Force is going to spend minutes on the machine gun. Still scared of accomplishing mission. It says we're on mission very soon. That's what you want to do. So they're here so they can ambush the next company that comes along? No, so that's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying it seems like an unnecessary risk to get an armed victim. So our objective is to win the war.
All right, so a simple question. Given that spectrum of good and evil good to bad, strong to weak that I showed you, why would a leader with goodwill, why would he or she communicate with their followers? What would be the intent, like you saw in this scene? What was the leader trying to communicate?
Communicate the proper objective, getting everyone to sort of play the same, be the same movie.
Okay. Okay, good. Other thoughts? Build on that.
Unity of action.
Yeah, and what would be the unit of action he was trying to remind the soldiers in that particular scene? Yeah, winning the war, right? But he had a particular mission, didn't they? To go save Private Ryan. And so the soldiers know that there's great danger in going after this machine gun. In fact, the post scene is almost, the unity of the group actually almost fractures. If you watch the movie, it's a great leadership scene because we see the literally unity in the balance. And of course, we see Tom Hanks reveals that he's an English teacher. And that's, he unpacks the black box about himself because they all thought he was some heroic figure before the war because he's so brave. And that's how he holds the group together. It's a fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. So we're, they're communicating. Really, if you think about it, they're trying to communicate. If they're a goodwill leader, the hierarchy of goods, the natural hierarchy of goods at stake, and the true good to be pursued, or the greater good over these lesser goods, real goods over apparent goods, right? True goods over fake goods, right? And so this is a challenge. So this is the model. I'm just showing you the model briefly that's in the book. And of course, in the business world, you have to use pictures and PowerPoints, right? So I studied the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, 7 Habits by Stephen Covey, and discovered the flaws within those books. Servant Leadership by Robert Greenleaf. I could go on with examples, and said, okay, how do we capture the essence of leadership and kind of poke at and disturb the post-enlightenment mentality around the nature of leadership? So in our model, I'll just show you briefly. We, of course, all this comes from Dr. Redpath's coaching of me as well. So he gets the credit for all the inspiration and clarity. He met me the first time when I was teaching at Duke University, and helped me to clarify this. So, but at its core, leadership's a communications relationship. So think about AI now in the context of the essence of what leadership is, a communications relationship. And it can be applied then across that spectrum we saw, from bad will to goodwill, strong to weak, right? And then we're getting cooperation by kind of increasing receptivity, overcoming resistance, and demonstrating this very provocative term, the quality of inequality. Okay? A very provocative term. And then if those 3 things are in place, then we can activate the 3 functions of a leader, which is to set the direction or aim, or help the group recognize it, activate potential, and unify the group. So there's a little caption in the book where I take a scene from Robert E. Lee talking to his commanders about Pickett's charge. And if you're familiar with it, one of his generals tells him it can't be done. He knows soldiering. Lee, of course, overrides. Okay, so he sets a clear direction, activates the charge, and the unity of the group is destroyed. Pickett comes back and says, I have no army. Lee is telling him, regroup, prepare for a counterattack. So this kind of framework then is used to help activate. And so you'll see it's an interactive tool we've built. You can go into each part of this and examine how this whole thing works. And I share it with you only because that's what's taken us so long with the book, is building all the interactive platforms so leaders can get educated. So there's 20 modules so far, things like that. So that's the basis then upon which I'm looking at this notion of leader. I'm sorry, I just skipped ahead. So let me take you into that right now. And just think about then, given that definition of leadership, the applications and assessment of AI. Yes, Warren? 5 minutes, okay. So just quickly, I'm going to skip this question. Let me just give you an overview, quick overview on how AI is viewed out there in the business world. Viewed as a black box, okay? Fascinating. Leaders and employees are surrendering to black boxes. They're not questioning. They just view it as beyond their comprehension. So that sense of wonder that we look for, that natural sense of wonder, is diminishing. It's fascinating. It's almost a weakening of the will that's occurring. Getting leaders to actually know their numbers, know their stuff, is becoming a real challenge for me as a leadership coach. Isn't that fascinating? Because they become dependent. I don't know that, they just don't get the part-whole relationship. And that language, part-whole, actually works with them. Getting them to actually use the words part-whole is breaking down this kind of Humean models, these ideas or systematic train of ideas. The black box programming, okay, hierarchies, they're causally closed systems. It's fascinating. When you actually get inside and you work with these developers, they can't even tell you coherently what's going on in others. It's literally scary and fascinating to observe at the same time. I'd invite you to go read about the Turing test. Just to give you quickly, and I'll share this presentation with you all, he changed the nature of the question itself from can machines think to can machines do what we do as human beings. So they actually skirt around the AI philosophy that's occurring. Actually, this is really what I still see going on, is they're asking philosophical questions that are beyond sophomoric. They're at the grade school level. They think they're discovering new philosophical concepts, but all they're trying to do is replicate what people can do. At least that's what I'm seeing so far. All right, so I'm going to skip these questions in the interest of time and just show you some of the key issues I'm coming across. One is overdependency. I coach a test pilot who he was on the most dangerous jobs, 5 most dangerous jobs in the world, and He said the biggest risk to airline travel now is in an unusual attitude, bad situation, the pilots just don't know what to do. They're so dependent on technology. So this is occurring. My wife is absolutely dependent on technology. If some of our best arguments occur in the car, I navigate with the stars. I'll navigate with a sense ordinal direction. She wants nothing to do with it. And so, actually she's winning the argument now. As Siri has improved, I'm losing on this because Siri is actually able to outsmart me on thinking through that. Here, let me go to the next one. I already told you about this over-functioning with airlines, okay? This is a huge problem. And the question will be, that's why we're so afraid of cyber attacks, because they're going to disturb the very infrastructure and ability to fly and do things. That's where the result is coming. And then this one, so I'm going to just show you this little video quickly and then we'll close off, okay? So this is actually occurring now. And if you haven't seen this, it's a fascinating video.
Given this audio as input,
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history.
our method produces the following output.
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history. And foremost in all of our lives has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando.
Here's the ground truth video of Obama saying the same words.
Especially our friends who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. I visited with the families of many of the victims on Thursday, and one thing I told them is that they're not alone. The American people and people all over the world are standing with them, and we always will. The investigation is ongoing, but we know that the killer was an angry and disturbed individual who took in extremist information and propaganda over the internet and became radicalized. During his killing spree, he pledged allegiance to ISIL, a group that's called on people around the world to attack innocent civilians. We are and we will keep doing everything in our power to stop these kinds of attacks and to ultimately destroy ISIL. The extraordinary people in our intelligence, military, homeland security, and law enforcement communities have already prevented many attacks, saved many lives, and we won't let up.
Here we compare to these at all who use the ground truth mouth region to drive the animation on the left.
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history.
Note that our method uses audio only and does not have access to the ground truth video.
And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando, especially our friends who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender.
The heart of our method is a recurrent neural network that transforms input audio to a time-varying mouth shape.
Now, most of us don't get our healthcare through the marketplace. We get it through our job, or through Medicare or Medicaid.
Then, we synthesize mouth texture.
And what you should know is that thanks to the Affordable Care Act, your coverage is better today than it was before.
Next, we enhance details in teeth.
I have free preventive care. There are no more annual or lifetime limits on sexual health care.
Finally, we blend the mouth texture onto a real-time target video and match the pose.
Women can get free checkups, and you can't get charged more just for being a woman. Young people can stay on a parent's plan until they turn 26. Seniors get discounts on their prescriptions. And no one can be denied coverage just because of a pre-existing condition.
Here we show our results with and without target video retiming.
I grew up without my father around.
Without retiming, he moves randomly and appears unnatural.
Well, I wonder what my life would have been like if he had been a greater presence. I'm also trying extra hard to be a good dad for my own daughters. Like all dads, I worry about my girls' safety all the time, especially when we see preventable violence in places our sons and daughters go every day.
To demonstrate the power of the method, we apply the same input speech mapped to 4 different target videos. Note that all 4 are synthetic and have different lighting conditions.
To help families refinance their homes, to invest in things like high-tech manufacturing, clean energy, and the infrastructure that creates good new jobs. Not to mention the job training that helps folks earn new skills to fill those jobs. The results are clear. America's businesses have created 14.5 million new jobs over 75 straight months. We've seen the first sustained manufacturing growth since then.
Okay, it keeps going, but the key thing that's going on in this AI that I'll conclude with is now they're able to actually manipulate reality, affect the very communications relationship that leaders are having with them. And you can see here how real it becomes as they synthesize and integrate the exterior sense faculty powers with these voice. So
Maybe like perhaps, I don't know, some special counsel might doctor something that comes out by midterm elections.
by midterm, that's right. Yeah, this is what we're facing. So let me just summarize with the final one: risk distribution. Google is now looking at the fact that cars will end up having to make ethical decisions. Asymmetrical risks will occur. All these present the problems that they're grappling with right now. And the biggest problem we have is a utilitarian ethic is forming, which is eventually going to lead to fantastic legal issues that we'll be confronted with. So that concludes my presentation for today. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Joe. Right now, for the remaining time, we'll open up the floor to questions.
Whoever has a question, just grab the mic.
I have actually an observation related to Peter DeMarco's presentation. Regarding leadership as a communications activity, in the sense that leaders are, to the extent that they're good, are always recalling, either establishing or once established, recalling to some multitude that is the leader and somebody else, just one other person besides. So to who's ever being led, that the nature of the organization, that is, every action in which human beings engage is always done within an organization. And we don't tend to be conscious of that at times. We tend to think that we're acting as individuals, when in actuality, we're always acting within the context of some sort of an organization. Action never happens outside of an organization, and it always happens within a multitude of organizations. And so one of the functions of a leader is always to recall to the multitude in which the leader is relating precisely what that organization is at the moment. Right? And this has to do with the nature of a genus, the way the ancient Greeks thought about it, and which was messed up by Darwin. Well, he doesn't really treat the notion of a genus, but species are only intelligible within the notion of a genus. The origin of a species is a genus. And he reduced this understanding basically to biology, but it's really a problem of the universals in the Middle Ages, going back to the ancient Greeks, where we can only make comparisons and we only communicate within some sort of a genus, which for the ancient Greeks was an organization, an organizational whole. Good, better, best is always in relationship to some action or something that is related to an action. And that always happens within the context of circumstances. Who is doing what, to what, with what, where, why, when, and how. So whenever we act, we're always doing it doing so with some sort of tools, our organs or external materials that activate our organs, facilitate their operations. And we're doing that in the context of multiple relationships. And those multiple relationships immediately change the genus to which we belong, the organization to which we belong. Like we're in here, for example, and we're communicating, we're doing this discussion, then we decide we're going outside because we have to go to the bathroom. We've entered a totally different relationship that's dominated, right? The example I like to give very often is a group of firefighters who go out bowling, right? And now they're bowlers because they've got that skill, that talent. The bowling, the fire breaks out, you know, and in the bowling alley, they fight the fire. And at the same time, they say they're married or whatever, you know, and so they've got those relationships don't disappear, but they recede. One recedes and another comes into play, and you constantly have to be reminding yourself of what the relationship is. If you've left the building and now are driving, and you're thinking about the discussion, and you forget that you're now involved in totally different relationships, right? You can't focus precisely on what you're doing, and you're actually in a leadership relationship, right? Because there are other drivers on the road or obstacles and so forth, and you have to negotiate constantly. Focus attention on precisely where you are. I'm eccentric in this relationship of thinking about where I am. I'm constantly doing it, you know. And as you get older, you become more eccentric in these kinds of things. And I walk around the house and say, "Where am I?" You know, precisely. I know what I'm doing in the sense that I know I'm in a different relationship now, and I'm choosing in precisely regarding that relationship. But I'm talking to myself as I'm doing, and people who aren't familiar with this, you know, this eccentricity, are kind of naturally wonder what the hell's wrong with this guy. You know? But now I try to encourage other people to do that because the relationship, we're involved in such a multitude of relationships that if we can't shift, like professional, non-professional, and a lot of the trouble we get in is precisely because we've forgotten the relationship that we're in, and a multitude of the relationships involve friendships or competitions, right? Like Trump is constantly aware of. And if you can't change immediately, quickly, to recognize, oh, now I'm involved in a different type of competition now, or I'm out of that one, I'm over here, and I can't switch. And the artificial intelligence and technology multiplies that on us so much that if you can't be aware of it, right, and you lose the sense of leadership. You become dominated by the situation.
I have a question for you. Talk about these three aspects of leadership: the aim, right? Unity, or the functions, the aim, the unity, and then this activate potential. And I made a comment earlier that when I was in business and was in a leadership role, I used the analogy of a movie, that making sure that everyone's making the same movie, that we all knew what the objective was, the overall important objective, and that we're all making that same movie. So we know what the movie is, and now we're all going to make it. But the third piece that you didn't have a chance to get into was the activate the potential. That seems to be the persuasion part. How do you get them to accept the aim? How do you get them to unify? In the Saving Private Ryan example you gave, he used, he said, well, he said, let's not leave that gunner there for the next company that comes along. We got to take that thing out. He used that as to persuade them as to why that was part of the objective, which was overall to win the war and to do the right thing. So I was wondering, just on that piece, the activate the potential, what was that? And is that the persuasion piece?
The aim should always represent some level of something that remains unactivated within the nature of the thing. So when I set a direction, it should be within the capability or the nature of the thing. So its potency and actuality are occurring. So you have existing capability, there's potential, and this is why people will look at a leader and say, oh, that's a pipe dream. There's no way it can be done. And they'll dismiss the leader, and the unity of the group will begin to disintegrate if they don't believe it's within the realm of possibility. Now, probability becomes a different distinction. So the aim, the clarity of the aim is understanding of the whole and its parts. And then the communications relationship that's occurring is communicating it, then helping the part-whole relationships to activate their potential. Where do you fit? What's your part in this movie? And then the unity is that the movie comes together as a unified, coherent fusion, if you will. Strength occurs as all those parts align to create a harmonious action. And then it's a circular activity. It's constantly going around. So as I discovered it, I realized that the activate potential, the biggest problem I would find with leaders is they could not calculate the potential. So, you know, I'd have a leader who said, we're going to double the size of this business in 5 years. I'd say, okay, what's the market opportunity space? What do you mean? Well, how do you know you can double it? Right. Right. And so I said, if you want your people to believe, you need to show them that this quality is represented by some intensity of the quantity. An intensive quantity can describe the qualities of these relationships. And that's how actually Dr. Redpath's introduction of Father Crowley's work is what helped me. Even as a guy who was trained in statistics, I didn't realize the connection. But that's how I built that model, was to reinforce that cycle.
Why it's a problem that AI is a black box for a leader. It seems that a lot of the things that a leader has to negotiate are black boxes for him, and that's not unique to AI.
Great. Actually, that is a great comment. A lot of the language that I come across when I'm working through very difficult ethical issues with leaders is they treat it as a dilemma, which is really nothing more than an epistemic problem, right? They just have insufficient knowledge. But the top CEOs I work with will tell you they have very few dilemmas. They know. They choose not to do the greater good over the lesser good. If you really sit down with all the folks who are the titans of industry, fascinating depth of knowledge that they have about how things really work. They actually know how the part-whole relationship works. Oh yeah, sure, there are black boxes within it, but they've got trusted lieutenants who explain the black box through analogy. Right? But by and large, the leaders who really get it, understand, they don't have perfect knowledge, but they have sufficient knowledge to know how things work. Go look at Bitcoin and what's going on with the cryptocurrencies, and you go talk to a guy at JP Morgan. What's his name? Who's the guy? What's that? Yeah, Jamie. I think he's the best banker in the world. Jamie Dimon fundamentally understands how things work. And so when you listen to him, you're looking at a master of competition who gets the part-whole relationship, understands the essence of blockchain technology, and can explain. Doesn't understand every detail, but sufficient that he can understand the communication among the parts and what will activate its potential or not. Is it going to be real or not? But you're right. There's, to some extent, you know, we just can't know. We can know sufficiently.
I have a question for Joe. So Peter, in his presentation, took made a poll, and one of the questions was, how do you feel about technology? I don't remember how exactly it was framed, but with such a small sample and 9 people in the room, the majority were fearful. Okay, how does this, what does Walker Percy and C.S. Lewis have to say about this? I think that your presentation was more was more psychological. That's what I'm interested in hearing, and I find that your title is also very interesting as well. Better Angels of Our Nature. What does that mean? The better angels meaning the robots or the human beings creating the AI? So because now we have it confirmed somewhat,
And, it's suggestion bias that since I went first and talked about how C.S. Lewis and Walker Percy are so, critical of technology, is that why everyone's so fearful now when you voted afterwards? It's a very good question because it is more psychological, the way they're presenting it. And it's amazing to see how both authors explore the psyche. And they need to, because the subject matter in both stories is the soul, and the soul is up for grabs. Are they going to go to heaven, or are they going to send themselves to hell? The title works on multiple levels, right? The first part, The Better Angels, again, it was somewhat inspired by Pinker's book, just because of this enlightenment, celebration of material progress, which we should celebrate. The fact we can broadcast this, the fact we have the means of bringing everyone together from Arizona and elsewhere to pull this together, we should celebrate this. But I put a question mark at the end of it because really, what do we mean by these angels? An angel, you tend to think, go to a shopping mall, you're going to see these little stores, card store, they're going to have little knickknacks and angels, right? With butterfly wings and stuff. But they're also fallen angels. And just because we say this is going to bring us out of ourselves materially and try to create a utopia, it could very well be a dystopia. We might be welcoming those fallen angels in. If I could make a comment in response to what Dr. Redpath was saying about moving from one organizational whole to another, I think one of the interesting things about both of these books is that we see that tension when confronted with the evil organization. Evil's a predation, right? But when there's this diabolical group in both stories, the NICE or the NIMH, there is that reluctance at first. There's that frustration, but at the same time, then both groups are totalizing. They don't want members to leave once they're a part of it. You can get in, but you can't get out. If you reread the books, I can't think of the Eagles song, you can check in, but you can never leave. So there's that freezing, Dante's depiction of the devil and hell, right? It's that freezing of a genus, of that organization, which becomes an idol, right? It's as dead as wood and ivory and stuff. There's no fluidity to it, a true fluidity, which is really what we should be looking at as far as organizational goals. It has unity. There's one unity.
I remember Barack Obama saying that none of it was
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that's true, but not in the sense that he meant it. That there are a multitude of governments, to which we belong, and one of the most profitable observations that I came across within the past several years of working with this notion of animal rationality and its relationship to human faculties and faculty psychology or parapsychology was the distinction that Gilson made in this work, Painting and Reality, which is fantastic, brilliant work, actually in metaphysics, and I think more than anything else, about the difference between conceptual possibility and the doable deed, and how that relates to philosophy or science, because it focused my attention on the fact that the way the ancient Greeks, classical thinkers, looked at philosophy, it was predominantly reasoning in relationship to command and control, and understanding how organizational activities were doable or not doable by these partial relationships, externally and also with respect to a human being, and that the conceptual possibility, well, is this thinkable, is it intelligible, will tell me whether or not parts can be organized, can be unified, abstractly considered. But if that's the only kind of understanding you have of contradiction, right? Then you're not going to be able to really have the intellectual awareness on a constant basis of whether or not this is doable by you, or some organization to which you belong at the moment. And all scientific reasoning, all philosophical reasoning begins with the recognition, oh yeah, this is something that we can do. It's doable. And so the Cartesian tries to prove it's doable, right? Rather than recognizing it's, on the basis of your own awareness of your activities, the exercise of your faculties, it's doable. And then modernity makes that even more complex by turning speculative contradictions into something that are just arbitrary wishes. Right? So what in the past had been real contradictions because the conceptual content couldn't fit together. Now, because conceptual content is just feelings, you got to take a vote to get agreement, and then you have no real intrinsic principle of leadership coming from the nature of the organization or the nature of your own faculties. And so this is why this whole question of leadership becomes crucially related to what's the nature of contradiction. Speculative contradictions and real contradictions. And in this enlightened Cartesian universe, can you actually have an understanding of real contradictions, which to me is the main problem that they have in Europe, Western Europe, and with Western civilization. They don't understand the nature of contradiction and the difference between real contradictions or behavioral contradictions and speculative contradictions. And don't even think that it's important to know the difference between the two. Devastating problem.
Yeah, actually, modernism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's Islam. It's Asherites. Mm-hmm.
In the 1970s in Germany, we had posters saying, I don't care about atomic energy, I just use a plug in my wall. That is a kind of techno-Gnosticism. Yeah. So I'm saying, so it's a pretty old thing. What I observe is in how, for instance, the Turing test is discussed, or to the examples you were giving, and also what you were giving is, it is certainly not the right way to be scared of technology and therefore ignore it. Yeah, because that makes us victims to it. That's for sure. We like it or not. But what I'm wondering is, what is the moment when ethics kicks in? I know it's very difficult to distinguish things you do from things which are morally being done. It's very difficult to distinguish politics with lowercase b. Yeah, just anything that has to do with political organization, political behavior. Politics from ethics. So, for instance, there are things that are morally detestable but politically necessary to do, and so on and so on. Yeah, like, for instance, killing someone and go to war. Yeah, that is obviously, at least, it's a hotly debated issue, but it's just an example of where political thought and moral thought are not totally overlapping. And we have to. So my question is, when we think about leadership, when we think about organizing human behavior, when we think about being aware of living in this nature, in this environment, and so on, what exactly is the point where moral judgments kick in. Because, for instance, the model of the tripartite model of leadership could also be used by a mafia boss. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was getting at. What is the point? Where's the wedge, or when is the moment, the tipping point, where the good has to come in order to make it right?
So that's a great question. For me, at least, it came into the word. The word. So if the good of communication requires us to share in reality, that's why Dr. Bloom's comment, language is treacherous, caught me this morning, because if you think about the word should represent shared meaning among two or more people. And the moment that the word becomes corrupted, or used to corrupt or manipulate or distort reality, which is what AI has the vast potential to do, then we've reached the ethical and moral point in which is a sharing of reality occurring, or is an illusion, a deception, something else occurring. So when I'm working with clients, I can assess the corruption of the culture by the corruption of language. And then okay. So that's how I try to do, is look at how corrupted has the language become, such that we now are losing our ability to share in what is true, what is real. So it's a very difficult process for me still, because I have to listen very carefully to what does the word mean, and how elastic people are with the meaning of certain words. And the lack of precision is rampant nowadays. Lack of sufficient precision that is needed, not excessive precision. So we have excessive precision in measurement and lack of precision in meaning. That's what I'm, as a practitioner, not as a scholar, but as a practitioner, that's what I see.
And both Lewis and Percy are earthly and they suffer. The material world we find ourselves slows us down. That's a good thing, because we're not instantly dead. We can hear it. And that's, I think, one of the cases politically. We had to enable that. They talk about that in extraction, nice, lost superior order, I think. Coming from the normal superior order. Well, being in the bureaucracy work with government, that's frustrating as it is, like, business world. So you can actually check some of those
Well, he said it last night, the bureaucracy actually holds, I thought that was fascinating, holds the organization unified.
It's something like justice by way of procedure.
Just by way of procedure. So red tape can be moral.
Determining moral activity. The way Aristotle answers that is, once again, in relationship to organization. Any kind of action in this physical universe of ours always proceeds from an organization. So when I get puzzled about this question, a question like that, I ask myself, what's the kind of organization that's capable of producing the action that you just talked about? Huh? What kind of parts do you need, right, to execute moral activity? And the parts would be free choice, which means, and so Aristotle says, well, we see people who are praised and blamed, rewarded and punished. And that's the per alia notum, to put them in Latin, evident truth, that moral activity exists because we see people praised and blamed, rewarded and punished universally in different societies for the choices that they make. So it has to be a doable deed. Right? not only does it have to be a doable deed, but it has to be a doable deed which in some way or other is related to the health, the perfection of the organization. Either individually, the person's doing something unhealthy, psychologically or physically for that individual, or in relationship to a social unity. And that's when we know we've entered into that kind of organization, because you can't command the impossible, you can't punish people, reward people, honor them, praise them for things they can't do. Right? It's impossible for them to do, and it's beyond their control. So I think that's the way we. And as a physician or someone who's raised in the family of medical doctors and that Greek tradition, I think Aristotle transferred that medical awareness of health and disease to psychological health and disease, and use that as the measure or standard for determining moral activity. And
I think we should have a break. We can be on 11.